Say a little bit about these Chinese hacking claims. I say claims as a disclaimer, but I absolutely don't believe a single word that comes from Beijing. So I think it is very credible that this has indeed happened. Um, if you're not familiar with the story, basically, there is a Chinese hacking group known as APT-31 or Judgment Panda, which is thought to have hacked into the details of 40 million voters in this country, which is most of us. Probably including me, probably including you. What the details are, who knows? But this is clearly a very large scale cyber attack. Now, I don't think it endangers individual British citizens, but it shows the arrogance of the Chinese regime, and it shows the preparedness that they're going to do that. Oliver Dowden in the Commons, the Deputy Prime Minister, has announced sanctions on individuals associated with this group. Good, good. It's better than nothing. I also understand the Chinese ambassador is being recalled, presumably by David Cameron, who's now our Foreign Secretary. Um, it's good that they're not sitting on their hands with this, but I can't help but feel that this is just a result of too much complacency for too long. Of course, China's denying it. They claim it's political theatre. They say they're the main victims of cyber attacks. I don't believe a word that comes from Beijing. They've shown that they're liars. They lie about their own history. They lie about so many things. And, one of the most defining events of modern times, the COVID pandemic, I believe, and this is my speculation, but I believe that became a worldwide pandemic rather than a localized epidemic because of the arrogance and the lies of the CCP. What was their response to COVID when it first broke out? Was it to take it seriously and immediately, get into quarantine? No, they punished the doctors responsible, the whistleblowers, basically for embarrassing them. And then their failure to be transparent with the rest of the world enabled that to spread. Now, individual governments were responsible for how they handled it, but I do think that a lot of the deaths around the world, including in this country, at least partly come down to the CCP's lack of transparency. They may or may not have created the virus. The lab leak theory has gained traction, but I think they're definitely culpable for their dishonesty. Um, so there's real world implications of China's power, and Ian Duncan Smith is one of several, at the moment, backbench MPs who have been warning about this for years. Now, it's rare that I'd agree with Ian Duncan Smith. I have heavily criticised him in the past for his role in what I see as welfare stigmatisation, and I stand by everything I've said on that. But he is right when it comes to China. Um, I think basically they've seen us as a soft touch, and if we look at three of the ministers responsible here, well, the Prime Minister, during his leadership campaign, Rishi Sunak was talking tough with China. He swore that he would close down Confucius Institutes. He's watered that down, and instead they've just withdrawn government funding from Confucius Institutes, not fully closed them down, as has been the case in pretty much every other Western country. Why not? It's there's speculation that these are acting as kind of fifth columns rather than just cultural hubs. So I think we need to close them. I think there's too many question marks around them. Um, James Cleverly, former Foreign Secretary, he treaded far too carefully. His Mansion House speech on China was loaded with caution, loaded with, yes, he mentioned human rights, yes, he mentioned differences, yes, he mentioned about the need to speak out, but there was also far, far too much caution there for my liking. I got the impression he was just treading far too carefully. And David Cameron, he's talking about, yes, we will call them out, and yes, these sanctions are justified now, but as Prime Minister, he brought in the so-called golden era of relations. He invited Xi Jinping to this country. Um, and, his defenders might say it was a different context then, but China's been throwing its weight around for years. with its so-called wolf warrior diplomacy, or lack thereof. Um, we've taken a consistently hard line with Russia, and rightly so. And I think it's one foreign policy area we've got right. But with China, it's been more patched. Boris Johnson flip-flopped on this issue. One day he would be speaking tough, the next day he would be claiming he's a Sinophile. Um, what I would like to see is not a complete cut off in relations. I don't think that's really realistic. It is the world's second biggest economy, so we can't realistically just completely sever relations. But we should definitely cool relations. I think we need to send out a message to Beijing that they can't just do what they like. And frankly, this gets into soft power as well. This might be a little bit controversial to say, but I think when Chinese nationals behave in an arrogant way, they need to be threatened with losing their visa. I'm not talking about collective punishment. I want to be very clear about that. But I'm talking about, for instance, the incident with Brendan Kavanagh, the pianist, that got a lot of attention earlier this year. Now, the three young Chinese involved in that, there's a bigger group actually, but there was three main ones, two young women and a guy. Um, Newton Leng was the guy. They may or may not have been Chinese spies. I'm not sure they were full level spies, but that is a good example of the arrogance that we even see with soft power, where they were acting in such an entitled way, making demands that he stop filming, even though that was a public place, and as a British citizen, he's every right to do that in a public place. And then the useless police officer who decided to act as a personal security detail for them. It may seem trivial in the grand scheme of things, but to me, it's just a hallmark of this complacency. And I will say this: the Chinese regime and Chinese nationals in this country will use the race card in a way that's easier to do than our differences with Russia. Why? Because a lot of Russians are, Caucasians, they're white. Not all of them. Russia's a big country. There's Asiatic Russians as well, for want of a better term. With Chinese, obviously, they're East Asian people, so it's easier to play that race card. And indeed, with that incident with Brendan Kavanagh, that's exactly what Newton Leng was doing. It's don't make it a race thing, because he was talking about why was she waving the Chinese flag in this country. So we need to push back against that. Because the irony is, in China itself, they're not sensitive on race. I've been there twice. They're not actually that sensitive on race, except when it comes to the West. So ironically, Western political correctness is used against us. I've long felt that way. Now, of course, this isn't to, stigmatize all Chinese people or say we should treat them all with suspicion. I'm not for a second saying that. I'm just saying that there are people out there, Chinese nationals, who do have an entitled mindset, and they do think that they can act in a certain way in the West that a Westerner would not get away with in China. I think that's unacceptable. So, for instance, if you have mainland Chinese engaging in harassment or bullying in our universities, they need to be kicked out. Not a generic warning of, or a generic message of, please respect each other. Any other student would face disciplinary action. So why should there be a soft touch with students who behave that way? And I'm not just making that up out of thin air. That was actually what happened in 2019 and 2020. A lot of Hong Kong students were violently threatened. And in some cases, there was actually violence. We saw that at the Manchester consulate. I think it was either last year or the year before. So soft power shouldn't be underestimated either as a kind of mechanism for the CCP throwing its weight around. What I'm not saying is that it's just cut off all ties, right? And, that would affect me. Personal disclaimer here, I'm an English tutor. I work with Chinese students. So I'd be a hypocrite if I said, let's just cut off all ties. I'd lose my livelihood, quite frankly. But one thing I've never ever done is sell my soul. And, if one of my students were to ask my views on these matters, I wouldn't lie. I'd say, yeah, we have issues with China right now, but I'd probably change the subject, to be honest. But what I'm proud to say I have never done when I was in China and in all my work, I have never ever sold out. Some Westerners who work in a capacity with Chinese people do. I never have. In fact, I've been in some awkward discussions. I even got into a debate in China itself, in Shanghai, with a woman I knew who turned out to be a CCP member. Maybe not the cleverest thing to do, but I knew her, and I knew her from the UK, and she took me a little bit off guard actually when she told me she was a CCP member. But I was candid, you know, maybe a little bit recklessly so, if I'm being honest. Because when you're in someone else's country, you know, sometimes you're kind of in their hands in a way. Um, so yeah, I'm not happy about this, but I'm not surprised by it either. I am pleased that the government's issuing sanctions. It's better than nothing, but this needs to be a wake-up call. Cameron, Sunak, cleverly, and other senior ministers need to accept now that we can't have relations as normal, and we cannot keep acting as if we're scared of China, and we need to pander to their sensitivities. I'm pleased the sanctions have been put in. It's better than nothing, but I also want to see, you know, what sort of approach Keir Starmer is going to take to this sort of thing, because you know it doesn't matter if it's a Labour or Tory government, China will continue thinking we're a soft touch. So Starmer needs to publicly also call this out, support the government in their sanctions, and publicly say what he will do if China crosses that line. Um, I think there's other things we could do. I think we're far too reliant on Chinese trade. You know, there's other emerging economies around the world. Yes, China's a huge economy. It's the world's second biggest economy, so we can't totally cut it off. I'm realistic enough to accept that. But there are other emerging markets, Vietnam, Indonesia, Brazil. There's a lot of other emerging markets that we could look to, um, and not be so reliant on China. Indeed, we could look at Taiwan even more. Taiwan's a major digital silicon producer, if not silicon, but you know, it's a major producer of components. We could increase trade with Taiwan, which is a win-win. On one hand, we're defying China, but also it's actually a good market. It's not as big as mainland China, but I just think this kind of inevitability attitude of, well, China is huge, so we better just toe the line and just trade with them and not saying anything. Um, yeah, this needs to be a wake up call. I don't think the average British citizen's in any particular danger, but, and confidentially, one of my subscribers mentioned he got hacked recently by Chinese hackers. I've had experience of it as well. It's not really something that happens to the average British citizen. I'm quite outspoken, and I got into some online feuds with Chinese nationalists. So that probably explained why that happened to me. But these people are incredibly forceful. You know, they will do that because nationalism in China is like a religion. It's, you know, forget ideological communism. This is something I would say about modern China. The average Chinese citizen really doesn't care about Marxist Leninist, you know, workers of the world unite. It's not about that. Communism is the political system, but it's kind of a quasi hybrid capitalist system as well. I mean, you get some real wealth within communist ranks, and incredibly, you know, sons of party officials behaving like playboys. But yeah, um, so just to summarize, I think this should be a wake up call. And I think that Rishi Sunak now, you know, the few months he'll have left as Prime Minister, he needs to go ahead and just ban these Confucius Institutes. It's not good enough just withdrawing funding. Why are they still operating? You know, when most other Western countries have closed them down, that will be a further sign to Beijing that we're not going to be pushed around. We know what they're doing. I'm not suggesting that all Chinese citizens be stigmatized. I would be against that. I mentioned COVID. Another side effect of COVID was anti-Asian hate crime. I'll always oppose that, There'd be no justification for any actual racist abuse of Chinese people. I will always condemn that. But at the same time, we mustn't allow Chinese nationalists to use the race card to act in this entitled way, as was the case with those who harassed Brendan Kavanagh. We need to send out a message to them that they're guests in this country and they should behave accordingly. But we're so politically correct. It's a thing with Western countries. In Asian countries they don't mess around. Western countries, oh wait, better not say that. It's too offensive. Pisses me off, to be honest. Um, Chinese students pay a lot of money to come here, so they should be able to get the full benefits of that education and the experience of being in the UK. But they also need to respect this country, and not all of them do. I'm not generalizing, but it's just a fact. There has been clear indications of clear evidence, indeed, of Chinese nationalists behaving in that way. Um, and like I say, that is a soft power thing. So I think Ian Duncan Smith is right. I think other Tory backbench MPs. I mean, the harassment of Tory MPs, that should be a wake up call for a Tory Prime Minister. I think Sunak's done far too little on this. Boris Johnson's done far too little. Liz Truss, actually, there's not much can be said for Liz Truss, but I will give her credit where credit is due. She has been consistently hardline with China. I will give her credit on that. And she's right. In fact, she is the only Prime Minister of recent years that really has been consistently tough with China. Boris Johnson flip-flopped, Rishi Sunak flip-flopped, David Cameron was on outright appeaser during his tenure. Theresa May, a little bit better than Cameron, but there hasn't been the level of pushback that there really should be. So hopefully that will change now. We have to stop acting like China is this big, frightening dragon that can do as it pleases. Yes, it's powerful, but no country has absolute power. We need to remember that.